My daughter-in-law's voice echoed through the speaker, cold and plotting. We isolate her completely. No more weekend dinners. It's her or us. I watched the room go still, and anything inside me that trembled snapped into resolve. I pressed play on what came next. Frank's voice, gentle yet firm. Don't let anyone turn her into a ghost in her own house. That was the moment I knew I wasn't alone. This is just the beginning of her fight. Before I continue, please subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Thanksgiving morning always carried a rhythm. The creak of the floorboards under my slippers, the hiss of coffee dripping into the pot, the soft thud of the turkey being placed on the counter. My counter. For over 30 years, it had been my domain. But this morning, as I walked into the kitchen, the silence felt different. The turkey was already in the oven. Dishes were lined up neatly on the counter, their contents steaming under foil. Callista, my daughter, turned around with a practiced smile. "Oh, Mom, you're up. Garrett and I thought we'd handle everything this year, so you can just relax, okay?" I stood there, still holding my apron, the same one with the embroidered pumpkin I wore every Thanksgiving since 1989. My hand slowly lowered. "Of course," I said. "That's thoughtful." But inside, something tightened. I wasn't tired. I wasn't old. I still remembered every spice and every oven timer. But apparently, remembering didn't mean anything anymore. I went upstairs, needing a moment. My room was always a refuge. I opened my dresser drawer, the one I rarely used, and there it was. The toy giraffe I'd mailed to Eli, my grandson, last month. Still in its box, unopened. A sticky note stuck awkwardly on the plastic window. He has enough toys. The rejection wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. That drawer suddenly felt colder than the wind outside. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the little box to my chest. I had combed through aisles to pick that toy. I'd remembered Eli's giggles when we visited the zoo, the way he lit up at the giraffe enclosure, but I supposed memories weren't the same as decisions. Back downstairs, the dining room was already half set. Callista and Garrett moved with a choreography I wasn't invited to learn. When I looked around for my usual chair, third from the head of the table, it wasn't there. "Hey, we moved your seat over here this year," Callista said, pointing to a spot farther down, close to the window. "Just for easier flow." Easier flow, not for me, clearly. The chair was fine, of course. It was sturdy, had arms, but it wasn't in the conversation's center. It wasn't near Eli. It was peripheral. "Thanks," I said softly, placing my folded napkin beside the plate. The fork shimmered in the light, but it felt heavier than it should. Later, as I walked down the hallway toward the guest bathroom, I heard them before I saw them. "She's just not letting go," Callista whispered. Garrett's reply was quieter, but I caught the edges. "We can't keep letting her act like this is her house." The words hung in the air like frost. I stopped, frozen, hidden by the corner. This was my house. Still is. I've lived here for 40 years. Raised them here. Loved them here. And now, I was some sort of squatter in my own memories? They moved away from the hallway. I stayed frozen for a moment longer, then stepped quietly into the bathroom. The light above the mirror flickered, or maybe my eyes did. Dinner began without a call from me. No grace said. No stories told of Thanksgivings past. I stood on the back porch instead, wrapped in my old cardigan, watching dusk fall over the trees. One chair on the porch remained empty, the one that used to hold my husband, Harold, every holiday afternoon. He'd always joke that the turkey smelled better outside. I looked at that chair, then at my hands, folded in my lap. When did I become a guest in my own life? Dinner was everything it was supposed to be. Laughter, clinking glasses, passing platters of turkey and stuffing. Except it wasn't. Not for me. I sat at the edge of the table, smiling. smiling when someone looked my way, nodding politely when asked to pass the salt. But the warmth wasn't for me. I was spoken to only when absolutely necessary. When I tried to contribute, the conversation shifted like I hadn't said anything at all. I noticed the way topics were danced around. When Garrett brought up next Christmas in Hawaii, I froze. "We'll all be there," he said, looking straight at Callista and Vera, not once at me. No one corrected him. No one included me. I swallowed hard, the cranberry sauce turning to paste in my mouth. Even my grandson Eli, usually clinging to my side, was too busy showing his new toy to Garrett. No one asked if I'd be coming. I wasn't part of the we. After dinner, I began clearing dishes out of habit. The kitchen was always mine, always where I felt needed. I reached for a stack of plates when Vera breezed in behind me, gently taking the plates from my hands. "You must be tired at your age," she said, with that fixed smile she wore when she was being polite but firm. "We've got this now." I blinked at her, unsure if I'd heard right. "Oh," I replied, stepping back as she turned to the sink. It was said so sweetly, so softly that anyone watching might think it kind. But it landed like a slap. "At your age." Not a question, a conclusion. I wasn't just excluded tonight. I was being phased out. Upstairs, I caught Rowan as he walked out of Eli's room. I needed to talk. I needed someone to see me. "Rowan," I said, catching his arm. "Do you have a moment?" He smiled and pulled me into a hug, the kind that used to mean everything when he was little. "Hey, Mom." "Yeah, sure, but—" He glanced over his shoulder. "Vera's waiting. I promised I'd help her with the baby stuff." "It'll just take a second," I said. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Can we talk tomorrow? I really—" "Go," I said, stepping back. He kissed my cheek and disappeared down the stairs. My words, whatever they were, never left my mouth, and I realized then that I no longer had a place in his thoughts. I was a memory that interrupted more important things. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, the walls too quiet, the clock ticking far too loud. The memory came uninvited, a sharp contrast to now. Frank, 10 years younger, standing in this same room with his sleeves rolled up and a glass of eggnog in hand, had looked at me with fire in his eyes. "Don't ever let them push you out of your own story," he'd said, when I doubted whether we should let the kids take over holiday hosting. "They might grow up, but this house, this family, still needs its roots." We had planned every holiday together, crafted traditions with care. He believed in me. Back then, I mattered. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking clock, and replayed every moment from dinner to the hallway, the laughter that passed over me, the words Vera used, Rowan's too quick goodbye, each one stacked like bricks on my chest. Had this been their plan all along? To make me feel unnecessary? To let me fade quietly into the background? Outside, the wind picked up. I pulled the blanket tighter and let the thought gnaw its way deeper. Was this always their plan? I woke with the same ache behind my eyes as the night before, the kind that made me feel like I hadn't really slept. The house was hushed, no sounds of dishes clinking, no giggles from Eli, no soft footsteps above. Just the kind of silence that felt too heavy, too full of things unsaid. I wrapped a cardigan over my shoulders and padded through the living room. Yesterday's decorations still lingered, half-deflated balloons, an abandoned paper turkey centerpiece, a crusty pie dish left on the coffee table. I moved from room to room, each space echoing something I couldn't name. Frank's chair, the bookshelf I used to rearrange each fall, a photograph of all of us from a happier Thanksgiving now slightly tilted on the wall. I didn't know what I was looking for, but my feet carried me to the attic ladder, something I hadn't touched since Frank passed. I stood beneath it for a long minute, hand on the rope, then pulled it down and climbed, step by slow step, into the dust and past. The attic greeted me with its familiar must and quiet. Sunlight streamed through a small window, highlighting the suspended particles in the air. Boxes lined the walls like forgotten sentinels. I reached for one labeled Garrett, College Years, thinking maybe there'd be something worth smiling over. Inside were yearbooks, a few CDs, and letters, stacks of them, tied in a ribbon that had once been red. One envelope slipped free. It wasn't sealed. My fingers hesitated, then opened it. The handwriting stopped my breath. It was Frank's. Garrett, the letter began. If you're reading this, then I'm no longer around to look your mother in the eye and make sure you remember what she gave up for you. The next lines made my chest tighten. Frank wrote about the way Vera sometimes spoke to me even back then, disregarding, clipped. He had noticed. He had seen it all, and I hadn't even known. Don't let anyone make her feel small, he had written. Not even your wife. Especially not your wife. There was a postscript. If you forget her worth, you forget me too. I sat on the attic floor, paper trembling in my hand, realizing I had been defending people who knew better. Who had been warned, and who chose to forget anyway. Later, downstairs in my bedroom, I laid the letter on my nightstand and just stared. I tried to remember the first time I met Vera, her crisp handshake, her perfect smile. Frank had been quiet that night. I thought it was because he was tired. Now I wonder if it was something else. So many things I had brushed off in the name of peace. So many quiet moments I had written off as nothing. As the sun began to fall, I stood by the kitchen window, watching the empty backyard where Frank once grilled every 4th of July. I remembered his voice on the hospital bed, warm and steady, even as he faded. Promise me, you'll never let them silence you. I had promised, and I had broken that promise. But now, maybe it wasn't too late. It's time I made my voice heard, whether they're ready or not. The morning sunlight poured in through the living room windows, casting soft gold across the hardwood floors. I stood by the doorway, coffee in hand, heart thudding against my chest like it wanted out. The family was still lounging from breakfast. Callista curled on the couch with her phone, Garrett flipping through the news on TV, Rowan speaking softly with Vera in the corner. I cleared my throat. Would everyone mind sitting for a moment? I'd like to say something. They glanced up, mildly surprised but not suspicious. I could tell they thought I was about to share some sweet, sentimental memory. Perhaps about Frank or one of Jasper's silly antics from childhood. But I had no sweetness to share this morning. Only a truth that had been ignored long enough. They gathered, reluctantly but politely, like one might indulge a neighbor who talks too long on the sidewalk. My stomach turned, but I kept my tone steady. This house was still mine, even if they all seemed to forget. I've been doing a lot of thinking, I began, folding my hands. About this family. About this home. About my place in it. Vera raised her eyebrows, Garrett looked up from his phone, and Callista leaned her chin into her palm like a teenager stuck at a parent-teacher meeting. I know change is inevitable, but lately it feels like I've disappeared. Like my presence isn't just unnecessary, but unwelcome. No one spoke, so I continued. Frank and I built this place. We made memories in every corner of it, and I was proud of our traditions, of the values we tried to pass on. But now decisions are made around me, not with me. My voice doesn't seem to matter anymore. Rowan's eyes shifted. Garrett gave a polite smile. Callista spoke first. Mom, you're overthinking this. Her voice was calm, patronizing, like she was addressing a child who'd misunderstood a bedtime story. Am I? I asked softly. Well, this is getting heavy. Garrett chuckled, standing. Come on, it's Thanksgiving weekend. Let's not turn this into a therapy session. His attempt at lightness did nothing to lift the fog in the room. I looked to Callista again. You're reading too much into things, she said, her face tightening. I don't think I am, I replied. I think you all made a plan to move on without me, and whether you meant to or not, you've made that very clear. Callista crossed her arms, irritated now. We're adults. We have our own lives. That doesn't mean we don't care. No? I said. Then why do I feel like a ghost in my own home? No one had an answer, only silence. Later in the kitchen, Callista followed me in, quiet at first. We've built a life that works for us, she said, her voice calm, measured. Maybe you should find something that works for you. I turned slowly. Meaning? Her smile faltered. Meaning? We're not trying to hurt you. But this isn't your house the way it used to be. I saw it then. Not just dismissal, but rejection. Not just separation, but disgust, and behind it all, a strange relief in her eyes, as if she'd finally said what she'd wanted to say for years. I didn't reply. There was nothing more to say to someone who had already turned the page without you. Outside, I sat on the garden bench where Frank used to read his paper. The wind was crisp, the late morning sun warming my shoulders. I closed my eyes and remembered his voice. Don't ever let them push you out of your own story. They hadn't just ignored me. They'd rewritten the story without me in it. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was ignited. This wasn't just about respect. This was about who I still was. And I hadn't said my last word. I stood in the kitchen that morning, apron tied tight like armor. The house was quiet, not in that peaceful, post-holiday way, but in the kind that feels like absence, like something had moved on without telling me. The light poured through the window in patches, glinting off the worn ceramic bowl I pulled from the back cabinet. I hadn't touched it in years. It was Mama's bowl, the one she used for her persimmon bread, a recipe nobody in the family ever asked for. Too old-fashioned, Callista once said. Too dense. But today, I wanted its weight. The sifting, the mixing, the kneading. They centered me. Each step deliberate, grounding. Today, I wasn't cooking out of habit. I was preparing something sacred. My silence had fed them long enough. When it was done, I wrapped the loaf in one of Frank's old checkered towels. He always used it to keep things warm. At noon, I drove to the church alone. The potluck was in full swing by the time I arrived. Long tables lined with casseroles and slow cookers. Kids darted between legs. Vera laughed a little too loudly near the punch bowl. Callista and Garrett stood by the far wall with their plates already piled high, talking with another couple I didn't recognize. Rowan lingered nearby, checking his phone. I walked past them all without a word and placed my bread in the center of the serving table. Then I turned. "Can I say something?" My voice cut through the chatter. Not loud, but it didn't need to be. The room quieted. "I won't be long," I said, stepping forward. I looked around at the faces that had grown used to my quiet nods and helpful hands. Some of you know me as the woman who bakes too much, or who always brings the napkins, or who gives advice no one asked for. But I want to remind you, before all that, I was a wife, a mother, a woman with a voice. They listened, some polite, some uneasy. I lost Frank 10 years ago, I continued. And since then, I've learned to live with that emptiness. But recently, I've realized there's another kind of loss that comes slower. The kind where you're still in the room but not part of the conversation. The kind where your presence becomes convenient, not cherished. Vera rolled her eyes. I didn't look at her. Frank once told me not to let anyone push me out of my own story. So I'm saying this now, not for guilt, not for sympathy, but because I owe it to him. And to myself. I will no longer make myself small to keep peace. I have value, and I deserve space. A hush settled after I finished. Not a single clap, but not a single objection either. I turned and walked away. At the far end of the hall, I saw Rowan watching me. Garrett stared at the floor. Callista muttered something and left early, purse swinging. Rowan came over quietly. I didn't know you felt that way. I looked him in the eyes. I've felt this way for years. You just never asked. He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. I'm sorry. I'm not asking for sorry, I said. I'm asking for presence. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the leaves along the church path. I sat on the garden bench beneath the dogwood tree where Frank's memorial plaque rested. Pastor Elijah passed by and paused. Strong words, he said. I gave a half smile. Sometimes speaking up isn't for them. It's for you. He nodded. And sometimes it's both. As he walked away, I leaned back, the chill air wrapping around me. But I wasn't cold. For the first time in a long while, I felt mine again. The sunlight that filtered into my bedroom Monday morning was crisp and pale, almost hesitant. It revealed everything. No longer comforting, just clear. I sat up slowly, letting the weight of memory settle in my bones. On the nightstand lay Frank's old leather folder, the one I'd avoided opening for 2 years. But yesterday night things changed. Inside were pages of legal detail mixed with personal notes only I could understand. There it was, a paragraph I'd skimmed over when grief still clouded my mind. It spelled out my entitlement, not just as his widow, but as a co-owner of our home, the place I still lived in. Places attempted to push me out of. I retraced my finger over the words with deliberate care, feeling something tighten, a lock clicking open. I wasn't emotional. I was precise. Later that morning, I found myself in a little office tucked in a strip mall off Main Street, sitting across from Attorney Moore. He greeted me gently, as though careful correlation of legal details mattered more than emotional storms. I laid out my discovery, then watched him nod, concerned and focused. Together, we shaped a letter, a formal assertion of my rights over the property and estate. The letter was calm, factual, and unavoidable. With one click, I sent the emailed version to Garrett and Callista. Then I placed a printed copy on the dining room table before leaving for my walk. Standing at the bottom of the stairs, I watched the envelope catch the light. Not hidden, not confrontational, just present. Hours later, Garrett returned home. He found it as he passed through the kitchen. I was in the living room, untouched coffee cooling beside me. When he emerged, he held the letter in quaking fingers. You went behind my back? He asked, voice rough, but my fury was tempered by reason. You left me no choice, I replied, calm and resolved. The words filled the room and settled between us. His eyes flickered. Shame, recognition, surprise. It wasn't dramatic, but the shift was palpable. That evening, I stepped onto the garden porch just after dusk, settling into the familiar wooden bench where the air was cool and still. Crickets began their quiet hymn. I folded my hands in my lap, watching shadows grow longer. I thought about how it felt to reclaim something with such quiet clarity, the few notes Frank left that guided me to act. I felt myself change. And no longer the woman who silently absorbed the world, I became someone who shapes it. The silence I shattered wasn't loud, it didn't roar, but in its breaking, it echoed louder than any shout could. The knock on my front door didn't come, but something else did. The glance. Mrs. Adler, who once brought me pound cake every other Sunday, barely looked at me as she passed with her Pomeranian. Dean, the retired mailman who used to wave from across the fence, paused at the edge of my walkway, eyes cast down. They've been talking, you know, he murmured as if reading my thoughts. Not me, but folks are saying things. He didn't wait for my response. I stood there, fingers wrapped around my coffee mug, the Missouri chill biting through my sweater. That morning, the silence on my block had taken on a shape, and it looked an awful lot like Callista's handiwork. Later that day, the sound of my laptop chiming broke the growing hum in my chest. An email, no subject line, no sender name. I hesitated before clicking. What stared back was a screenshot of a group chat. At the top, family, private thread. My daughter-in-law's words were bold, cold. She's been manipulating Dad's will for years. Frank wouldn't have wanted this. She's unstable. My breath caught. The thread continued. Time to protect our assets before it's too late. Protect assets. I pressed a hand to my chest. What was I to them now? A threat? A liability? The betrayal had a new form now. Public, documented, and poisoned with certainty. The pain pulled me backward, 12 years to be exact. Frank and I were at a church fundraiser. Someone had accused a widow of misusing community donations. No evidence, just whispers. And Frank, my Frank, stood silent as the woman's dignity was shredded. Later, I'd asked him why. Some fights, Laureen, get uglier when you touch them. I didn't agree then. I don't agree now. Silence has never protected anyone. It only shields the accuser. I closed the memory like a book and looked back at the screen. This wasn't a fight I was going to leave untouched. That evening, Attorney Moore's voice on the phone was calm but tight. Laureen, I just received notice. Someone filed a report to Adult Protective Services. I leaned against my study wall, legs suddenly limp. They're alleging emotional instability, coercive behavior, claims you've been unfit to manage your own affairs. Anonymous? I asked, but I already knew. Moore paused. Legally, yes. I sat at my desk and pulled out a yellow notepad. Starting tomorrow, I said, I'll document everything. No more he said, she said. We deal in facts now. Moore didn't argue. I hadn't been to Garrett's house since before the wedding. But tonight, I stood outside in the cold, listening. I'd followed a hunch, and it led me to their side door, cracked open just enough to hear. She's not going to let up, Garrett's voice said, low and tight. We should have waited. Callista's reply was icy steel. We isolate her completely, Garrett. No more weekend dinners, no more Eli sleepovers. We make her a memory. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Their words were strategy. I was the enemy, the outsider in the family I'd built. I backed away, not letting the wood creak underfoot. The heartbreak wasn't new, but the clarity was. Back home, I sat in the garden with moonlight resting across my shoulders. The night was silent again, but not empty. My phone sat on the bench beside me, charging. Tomorrow I would start recording. Every conversation, every omission, every tactic. Not for revenge, but for protection. For truth. The gloves were off, and I wasn't afraid of bruises anymore. I stood in the family room as the last streaks of daylight filtered through the sheer curtains. The house was still, save for the faint tick of the wall clock, an almost theatrical silence before what I knew was coming. I'd sent the invitation hours ago. Just a short message. I'd like us to talk this evening. All of us. At home. Callista was the first to enter, her steps measured, lips pressed tight as if bracing for a courtroom rather than her mother's living room. Garrett followed closely, hands in pockets, not meeting my eyes. Vera trailed behind with her usual cool disinterest. Rowan came last, lingering in the doorway. Only Tamsin, my niece, greeted me with a genuine hug. We took our seats around the room. No food, no drinks, just a charged, pulsing air between us. I gave them a soft smile and said, "Thank you for coming. I'd like us to be honest tonight. No finger-pointing. Just truth." They nodded, though some more reluctantly than others. Then I reached for the remote and turned on the television. The screen lit up with a paused image. I pressed play. Callista's voice filled the room, clear, deliberate, and cruel. "She's confused, Garrett. We need to step in. Isolate her. If she keeps meddling, this home won't be safe." Gasps. Silence. The audio played on, her plotting, her deception, the coldness in her tone. Garrett's face drained of color. Vera looked away. Tamsin sat motionless, jaw clenched. No one said a word when it ended, not even Callista. She was frozen, eyes wide, throat working to swallow words she no longer had the power to twist. But I wasn't done. I walked to the side table, opened the drawer, and pulled out an old USB stick. Frank recorded this 2 weeks before he passed, I said quietly, inserting it into the media player. He didn't tell anyone, not even me. I found it last week. His voice came through the speakers, unmistakable. Steady, loving, tired, but sharp. If you're hearing this, Frank began, it means Lorene's been forced to fight alone. Don't let anyone turn her into a ghost in her own house. She is the heart of this family. And if you forget that, you've forgotten me too. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't blink. Callista visibly recoiled. Garrett's mouth parted slightly, as if he might speak, but he didn't. Vera remained stone-faced, but her leg bounced nervously. Then, Rowan cleared his throat and leaned forward. I'm sorry, Mom, he said. Just that. No qualifiers. No excuses. And somehow, that made it land even harder. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. No one else spoke. Eventually, I stepped outside into the cool night. The stars blinked faintly above. Behind me, voices murmured, low, unsettled. But I didn't turn around. I had stood up. I had spoken. And they had listened, not because they wanted to, but because truth demands ears. The porch light flickered gently above me, casting a warm halo. I wasn't here to reclaim power. I was here to reclaim presence. The sun rose without ceremony, painting pale orange light across the kitchen counters. I stood there, fingers wrapped around a mug I hadn't yet sipped from, watching steam curl in slow, deliberate spirals. The kitchen, once alive with chatter and chaos, now echoed with nothing. I didn't expect overnight miracles, not from people, not from wounds. But I did expect this silence. It was a silence I had chosen, not one forced upon me. The chairs remained pushed in. No footsteps above, no creak of opening doors. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of my breath. I had nothing left to prove, and still my heart hadn't settled. I could feel last night's confrontation brushing against my skin like a draft through a cracked window. When the back door eased open, I didn't turn right away. I heard the cautious steps, soft and unhurried. Rowan. His presence felt like a warm coat draped over cold shoulders. He lingered for a moment before speaking. You were right, he said, voice gravelly from sleep or guilt, or both. I just didn't want to choose sides. I looked at him. His eyes, too much like Frank's, carried a weight that felt earned now. He sat beside me on the porch swing, leaving a respectful space between us. I know, I replied. For a while we watched the sky turn blue together. He reached over, hesitant, and pulled me into a hug. Not long, not perfect, but it held the truth. Inside, they watched. Through the family room window, I could feel their eyes, Garrett with his chin in his palm, Callista, arms crossed, bitter and unmoved, Vera looking down, fiddling with her wedding ring. They didn't come out, but they didn't turn away either. I didn't need applause. I didn't want groveling. What I wanted, what I'd always wanted, was to be seen, to be held in the fabric of this family, not stitched on as an afterthought. Later that afternoon, in the quiet of my room, I pulled out a notepad. I wrote not because I thought they'd read it immediately, but because I needed to write it. I forgive you. I forgive you not because you asked for it, not because you deserve it. I forgive you because I will not carry this bitterness one more mile. I forgive you because I am more than what you see. I forgive you so I can rest at night without waiting for you to understand me. I folded the note and placed it on the hallway table. Just above it, I set the pen I used. No envelope, no ceremony. That evening, I walked down the hallway. Each door I passed was closed, but I could feel the breath on the other side. Hesitant, unsure, present. The note stayed untouched. That was fine. They'd read it when they were ready. And if they never were, I had still said what I needed to say. I had freed myself. The kettle hissed softly, and I stood motionless, fingers loosely wrapped around the ceramic mug I'd had since Frank's last Christmas. The house hadn't changed, not really. Same creaks in the floorboards, same dented drawer in the kitchen island that never closed right. And yet everything felt rearranged. 2 weeks had passed since Rowan stood beside me in the yard. His words, his hug, they'd lingered like sunlight through frosted glass. But warmth doesn't change structure. The silence upstairs still came with footsteps that paused when they heard mine. Forgiveness, I'd learned, is an act, reconciliation. That's a decision made by two, not one. The coffee brewed slow and dark. I didn't add sugar. That morning, I didn't want sweet things. Pastor Marla caught me just as I was zipping up my coat in the church hallway. Her presence was always calm, the way still water speaks if you know how to listen. "Laureen," she said, gently resting her hand on my arm, "you've been quiet." I nodded, not ready to unpack what that quiet contained. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she offered. I let out a dry chuckle. "I'm used to it." "But are you healed?" she asked. "Grace isn't permission for others to keep hurting you. It's the space you make to protect your own heart." I looked at the stained glass just beyond her shoulder. Blues and golds wrapped around a dove. I wondered if that bird was flying toward peace or away from a storm. I checked my phone later that evening. Still no message from Rowan. Nothing from Vera either. I had sent a single line a week ago. "Whenever you're ready, I'm still here." It sat unread. Or worse, read and ignored. I stared at the blinking cursor, hovered my finger over the screen, then hit delete. If love needs constant reminders, is it still love? I turned the phone face down. This part, the waiting, felt heavier than all the years I spent trying not to be a burden. The call came just past 10. Garrett's name lit up the screen, unexpected. My first instinct was to let it ring. But something in me, it wasn't hope, but maybe its tired cousin, answered. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice softer than I remembered. "Garrett. I've been thinking about what you said, about Frank, about everything." He paused. "You might hate me for this, but I scheduled a family therapy session. Tomorrow." Silence. "A referee might help us hear each other better," he added. "Would you come?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to try, but because trying had already taken so much. "I'll be there," I said. The office was beige. Beige walls, beige couch, beige air. Even the tissue box looked nervous. Garrett sat beside Callista. Vera was on Zoom, her screen muted at first, face unreadable. The therapist, a woman in her 50s with kind but alert eyes, nodded as we introduced ourselves. We were polite. Then we weren't. Garrett broke first. "You made everything conditional," he said to me. "It always felt like love came with a receipt." I blinked. Callista leaned in. "You always made us feel like guests in your museum of memories." Vera unmuted. Said nothing. Just stared. The therapist turned to me. "Laureen, do you feel safe with your children?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. The pause stretched. The silence again answered for me. I stood clutching my purse, heartbeat loud in my ears. "I'm not sure what healing looks like," I said. "But it doesn't look like this." And I walked out. The morning stillness felt heavier than any storm. I watered the garden in silence, each drop echoing in the quiet as though calling attention to itself. It wasn't peaceful. Even the air seemed sharp, edged by memory. I avoided the chair Callista occupied during therapy. That spot felt like bruised wood, bruised memory. Every room in this house held fragments of us, thick with echoes of joy, hurt, regret. I moved slowly, honoring each one. By midday, I found myself cleaning out a drawer in our bedroom, one I hadn't touched in years. There, nestled beneath hotel receipts and old correspondence, lay an unopened envelope addressed to me in Frank's precise handwriting. My heart thudded as I pulled it free. He must have written it before his final trip, the one from which he never returned. The handwriting was shaky, yet sure. "My dear Laureen," it began. A regret followed, about the way he'd raised Garrett, about fears that one day I'd face their children's resentment alone. "If you're reading this beyond me, I'm already gone. I love you more than all the traditions we built. Promise me you won't shrink to make things easier. You deserve your space." Tears welled, not from sadness, but from relief. He spoke for me, and to me, even in absence. I slipped onto the park bench down the street, letter folded in my hand. The afternoon breeze ruffled my hair gently, almost comforting. I wondered, do we inherit guilt, or do we grow it? Maybe being wrong doesn't mean you're bad. Maybe it only means you were doing the best you could with what you had. Later, Callista emerged on the front porch, a pie in hand, its crust golden, fragrant with apple and cinnamon. There was no apology, just the quiet offer of shared coffee. "I thought you wouldn't want me here," she whispered. I lifted my gaze to hers. "I didn't, but I'm glad you are." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even peace. It was a gesture saying, maybe there's room. That alone was enough. That evening, I sat at my desk and opened my journal for the first time in months. I drew a single circle on the page, representing home, garden, me. Then I traced it again, thicker this time. I used to make space for everyone. Now, I'll keep a small circle and let people earn their way back in. I didn't close the journal. I laid it aside and stepped outside, letter in hand. In the dying light, I gathered the letter in my palms and struck a match. The flame caught quickly. I watched the paper curl and blacken, letting Frank's fears burn away with it. His love remained in me, no longer a burden or regret. I inhaled deeply, fresh, cool air swirling around me. I didn't need his regrets anymore. I would write my own. Sunlight kissed the kitchen windows in soft, hopeful strokes, painting the countertops with gentle warmth. The kettle hissed as I set the tea bag afloat, steam rising in quiet spirals. For so long, silence had felt heavy, lonely, uncertain. But this morning, it felt intentional. Full. Peace did not scream. It whispered. And today, I welcomed that voice. I stepped into the garden, breath filling with the scent of wet earth and early blooms. The gate opened quietly, and Rowan stood there, a small potted plant in his hand, an unexpected olive branch. No hesitation, no awkwardness, just presence, as if planting trust was as simple as offering soil and seed. "Thought this might help," he murmured, handing me the green shoot. I paused, then nodded. "It will." Together we knelt among the beds, loosening the soil with careful hands. Each seed we set, tiny, hopeful, felt like a promise. Relationships healed gently or laid to rest with dignity. I hummed a melody Frank used to sing, and memory and newfound hope intertwined, each note affirming that life grows again, even after the hardest winters. Later, I found myself on the back porch, letter in hand. I had written to Callista, not in anger, not to demand reconciliation, but to offer an olive branch. Words like, I hope you're finding your way, and if you ever want to join me here, this garden, this home, you're welcome. I tucked the letter in an envelope, but I didn't send it. It wasn't meant to force anything, only to show that a bridge remained should she ever choose to cross. Just then, Garrett appeared at the door. His face was quiet, tentative. "Are you ready?" he asked, voice soft. I nodded, stepped aside. "Come in." Evening came with a gentle hush. I stood at the front porch, the day winding down. I closed the door softly behind me, not shutting anyone out, but folding that chapter gently shut. The closing wasn't a rejection, it was a punctuation, a clear signal that my story, at least this chapter, was complete. I turned toward the garden. The seeds nestled in their rows, waiting. A breath swelled in me, calm and full. My circle was small now, garden, home, myself, but complete. The unspent letter, the shared seed, the closed door, they all held promise and peace. My story doesn't end here. This is just the first morning of something new. A life shaped by presence, not absence, by choice, not concession. And for the first time in years, I am home. I've lived long enough to know that sometimes silence isn't peace, it's surrender. And sometimes the loudest act of courage is simply saying, "No more." If this story has shown you anything, let it be this. You are never too old to reclaim your voice. You are never too late to draw new boundaries. Whether you're a mother, a daughter, a son, or simply someone trying to be heard, know this: your presence matters. Your truth matters. And dignity is not something we earn from others. It's something we affirm in ourselves. Now I ask you, have you ever felt invisible in your own home, your own life? Have you ever stayed quiet when you should have spoken up? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's start a real conversation. And if this video touched something in your heart, if you saw a piece of yourself or someone you love, drop A or type 1 in the comments to let me know. Tell me where you're watching from. Or if it didn't quite land for you, I'd love to know why, and where in the world you're tuning in from. If you're new here and stories like this speak to you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. More powerful, healing, and honest journeys are coming, and I want you to be part of them. Until next time, keep your roots deep and your voice strong.